This worn ZEON 12S Platinum 12,000 pound winch with synthetic line is for those of you that have a 1987 all the way up through the most current model year Wrangler that are looking for a heavy duty winch with a ton of bells and whistles and a price tag to match. This is going to be a pretty easy 2 out of 3 wrenches for the installation. Of course, a winch is an electric piece. It does require a little bit of wiring, but it's very, very simple, even if you're not comfortable with automotive wiring. So we'll walk you through it in just a second. Now, there are a couple big decisions to make when choosing a winch, and the first is going to be your pulling capacity. So if you have a big, heavy 4-door JK you get buried up to the axles in mud every weekend, you're going to want to look for something around this 12,000 pound mark, 10,000 pound mark, something like that. If you have a lighter Jeep, maybe you get high centered every once in a while, you don't need as much pulling capacity, you can get something a little bit lighter and save yourself some money. The rule of thumb is that you want your winch to be able to pull right around 1.5 times the loaded trail weight of your vehicle. After that, you'll have to decide what kind of line you want on your winch. Now, a steel cable is a little bit more traditional. It's what you're used to seeing. They're pretty abrasion resistant, don't require a lot of maintenance, and they are going to be pretty strong. The downside to a steel cable, if you want to call it that, is that while it stretches the same as a synthetic line does, it stores that energy. And if the line were to break, it can fly through the air, causing damage or worse, injury. That's where a synthetic line comes in. This is going to be a little bit lighter when you're dragging it up a muddy hill. It's not going to kink as easily as a steel cable will, and it doesn't store energy even though it stretches, so it's going to be a little bit safer. The only downside is that it's not quite as abrasion resistant as a steel cable would be, and you're going to want to keep an eye on it. If it does start to get some wear, you'll want to replace it, but that's pretty much the same for a steel cable too. So which line you choose really comes down to your budget, how you use your Jeep, and what features you're looking for from your winch. So once you've made those two big decisions, you'll have to choose a brand and what other bells and whistles you want out of your winch. And as I already said, this is Warn's top of the line winch. This is a ZEON Platinum. This has a ton of those bells and whistles built into it. So a couple of them are that this has a wireless remote control. It actually doesn't even have a spot where you can plug a wired remote control into it. So it has that wireless remote control that pairs directly with your Warn winch. There's just a little switch on the back to turn the winch on. Once it's on, everything's done through the remote. And when I say everything, I mean everything. Going from engage to free spool on the clutch is done through the remote. Of course, spooling in and out. But this also has a couple of spots where you can pick up accessories for lights up on the front bumper if you want to, anything you want to be able to turn on and off with that remote. You can plug directly into the back of the winch. There are a couple of spots right over here for them to plug in, and that's not something that you can find in a lot of other winches on the market. So again, a lot of bells and whistles. On top of that, this is a Warn winch. Warn makes a very high quality product. They always have. They stand behind their winches, and you know when you get yourself into a sticky situation on the trail and you push that button, your winch is going to work. So you're paying for bells and whistles, you're paying for a very high quality winch by a big name brand. You're paying for a synthetic line and for a winch that can pull 12,000 pounds. And all of that adds up to about a $2,000 price tag. Now, there are a lot of winches out there that are significantly less expensive, but they're not going to have all of those things that I just mentioned. So if you are really looking for the cream of the crop, the top winch out there, this is going to be it, and you're just gonna have to be okay with the price tag. So like I said before, this is going to be a fairly easy installation, right around 2 out of 3 wrenches. Let me show you how to do it. For this installation, we used a 10mm socket and a 5/8 socket with a 3/8 extension, all driven by a 3/8 socket driver. We also used an 11/16 wrench, a pair of wire cutters, a pair of needle nose pliers, some electrical tape, and finally a pair of gloves. So like I said before, easy 2 out of 3 wrenches for this installation. We're only stepping up to 2 because of the little bit of wiring. We're gonna get to that in a second, and it's very, very simple, even if you don't have a lot of experience with automotive wiring. But first things first, we have the winch here on the table, and we're going to get these nuts installed in the feet of the winch. The reason that I do this here on the table is so that I can use a little bit of electrical tape, or whatever your favorite kind of tape is, to hold these nuts in place. Otherwise, if you tilt the winch even a little bit as you're getting it installed on the Jeep, those nuts can fall right out, and that can be very, very frustrating. So we're just going to flip the winch up on its face, and we'll slide the nuts directly into those captured holes where they go. Peel off just a little bit of electrical tape and tape that in place. We'll do that with all 4 of the nuts in the bottom of the winch, then we'll move on to the Jeep. Our next step is going to be installing the fairlead on the fairlead mount. Now, as I mentioned before, you are going to need either a winch-ready bumper or a winch plate, and most, if not all of those, are going to come with a fairlead mount attached right onto them. So here is our aluminum fairlead, our Hawes fairlead for our synthetic line, and we have our hardware, so we're gonna get that bolted up. Once the bolts are started, we can tighten them down. At this point, we're going to get our line attached onto our winch drum. Of course, we're not going to be able to spool it in yet, but I find it easier to do this with the winch on a workbench than bolted into the Jeep. With the fairlead being right here, it can make it a little bit difficult to maneuver around and do what you need to do. So the first step is to take our line here. We have a pair of wire cutters, and we're going to cut away the wire tie that's keeping everything coiled up. And then we're going to feed this abrasion resistant piece over our line. Now, because the one end of the line already has this big steel block on it, this is going to be our hook end. This doesn't go through this sleeve, so we actually have to feed it through the small end all the way around to the other side of the line. So first step is to get that done. Now that the abrasion resistant sleeve is installed on the line, we can get the line started on the drum. So in order to do that, we want to make sure that the line is fed properly, and you want it to be fed underneath the drum and then attached to the drum itself. So we're going to pull a little line out, we're going to leave that fed through, that way we don't forget that step in just a second. And what we have to help us get the rope threaded through the drum is this installation wire here. So something similar to the wire that you would hang a drop ceiling with, essentially. We're going to feed that through the eyelet of our line, straighten out the other end here. And this is really just like your starter. So you want to send this through the drum, and then you can pull on the other end, and that'll get the line pulled through. So we have our starter wire through there. We're just going to flip the winch on its back just to make it a little bit easier for us to pull this through. And then really it's just a matter of some brute force to pull the line through the drum. So once you have the end of your line come through the other side of your drum, you can remove the installation wire. You can just cut it out of the way if you've twisted it up during the installation. And then you have the small key that we're going to install inside that loop of the rope. The idea here is that the key can't make its way back through the drum, so that's what's going to hold your rope in place. So once you have the key inside the loop and in that hole, you can pull your line back a little bit to get everything seated. So that's going to be enough to get us started. Once we have the winch installed on the bumper, we can really give it a good pull, which will completely set the key in place. And then once we start putting some tension on the line as we spool it in, it'll seat the rest of the way. At this point, we're ready to get our winch sitting down on our winch mounting plate, or in this case, our winch ready bumper. Just drop it right down onto the plate. Set all of our wiring aside. We're going to get to that in just a second. But before we do anything else, we're going to take the end of the rope and feed it through the fairlead. That way, again, we're making sure nothing's tangled, we're making sure we don't forget about anything, and we're also making sure that the rope is fed the proper way around the drum, so when you hit winch in, it winches in, and winch out, it winches out. Now we can go from underneath the winch plate and put our bolts through the winch plate and up into those captured nuts that we installed in the bottom of the winch. We'll get all 4 of them in there hand tight and then crank them down. The next step is going to be wiring up our winch. In order to do that, we're going to get the hood popped, get the wire routed along the inside of the fender and up to the battery. So we're going to route our wiring underneath the grille here. And then there's a spot straight up to the outside of the headlight that you can follow that will pop out right up top for you. Once up at the battery, we do our very simple electrical connection, black to black and red to red. And we'll tighten those down. Now, you can run your wiring however you choose to. This is how most of you will do it, but as with all wiring, make sure it stays away from anything that gets hot or anything that moves. Now it's time to spool the rest of our line onto our drum. We're going to use the remote control for that, but in order for the remote control to work, there's an on-off switch on the back of your solenoid pack. So we'll press that button. As long as the green light's on, we're ready to go. So with the ZEON Platinum winch, all of the controls of the winch are done through the winch controller, the wireless winch controller. This actually has a little color screen on it. Everything is done through here, including going from free spool to an engaged mode on your clutch, and also the accessories that you can plug into this, any 12-volt accessory, any sort of lighting or anything, you would also control through this remote as well. So now that we have the winch turned on the back there, we'll hold the center button on the remote. That'll boot it up. You can see it coming on now. And then we'll go to our winch, hit the center button again, and that gives us our winch controls. And then we can winch in or winch out. And of course, in this case, we're going to go ahead and winch in, and we're going to get the line spooled onto the drum. So as you can see, as I'm spooling in the winch, I have a pair of gloves on. I'm keeping my hand far enough away from the fair lead that if something were to get hung up, I would be able to fully stop the winch before I would get anywhere near this pinch point here. And I'm starting with the line on one end and working my way back and forth so you have nice, even, easy wraps on the drum. Now, ultimately, you want there to be some tension on this line as it's being spooled in. So what we would do in a real world situation is attach one end of our rope to a tree, another vehicle, whatever it is. We could have somebody in the vehicle dragging the brake as we're spooling the winch in, or set a couple of clicks on the e-brake, whatever your preferred method is. All of that information is in the booklet. What we're doing now is just getting the line spooled onto the drum so you can see what it looks like when it is all spooled up. But if you're doing this at home, you want to make sure you do it the right way. So as I said, we didn't spool this on like we would if we were actually taking this Jeep out on the trail, so don't judge my spooling job. The next step in the installation is going to be attaching the hook onto the line. So we'll take the cotter pin out of the hook, take the main pin out of the hook, set everything through the loop in the line, and then use a pair of pliers to open up the cotter pin after we're done to make sure it's not going to fall off. And that's going to do it for the installation of this winch. So if you are looking for one of the highest quality winches out there on the market with a ton of pulling capacity and a bunch of bells and whistles, and you have the budget for it, I would recommend taking a look at this option for more, and you can find it right here at ExtremeTerrain.com.